The hall was designed to make hesitation feel like a crime. Every surface of the Valan Dominion's ceremonial chamber shimmered with regulated light fields that adjusted themselves to the emotional index of the guests. When the mood drifted too far toward uncertainty, the ceiling softened its glow. When diplomacy grew tense, the walls subtly increased symmetry to remind everyone that order still existed, even if it was mostly decorative. Princess Elira stood at the center of it all, perfectly still in theory, less so in practice. Her long ears, thin, elegant structures that caught even the smallest fluctuations of sound and data, betrayed her in ways no crown could fully suppress. They tilted slightly whenever someone lied too confidently, which meant they had been moving almost constantly since the ceremony began. She had been trained for this moment since she could walk. That was the official story. The unofficial story was that she had been trained since she could refuse, which the Valan education system had promptly redefined as advanced etiquette refinement. Beside her floated the ceremonial interface, a hovering ring of light that projected the groom's diplomatic profile in slow rotation. He was from the Orion Consortium, a man carefully assembled by committees, algorithms, and at least 4 emergency meetings that ended with someone sighing and approving him anyway. He smiled too correctly. Elira had noticed that immediately. A correct smile was one that cost nothing emotionally, which made it very expensive in practice. Across the hall, the guests sat in layered tiers of levitating platforms. Some were physical beings, others were translated projections from distant systems, and a few were so heavily encrypted that they appeared only as polite static with occasional manners. Everything was ready for unity, which was usually when something went wrong in a way nobody had budgeted for. The first sign was the security drones pausing mid-flight, as if they had collectively remembered an appointment elsewhere. Then the ceremonial doors, which were supposed to only open for authorized diplomatic codes, opened anyway with the casual indifference of a system that had just been offered something interesting to think about. A maintenance pod rolled in. It was not elegant. It was not dignified. It still had VEYLAN Palace Cleaning subsection, do not reassign, flickering across its side in fading paint, as though it had spent most of its life being politely ignored by authority. Inside it stepped a human. That alone was enough to make 3 separate diplomatic subroutines crash and restart out of embarrassment. Humans were not forbidden in Valan ceremonies, but they were strongly discouraged in the same way one might discourage open flame near oxygen tanks or telling jokes during treaty negotiations. They tended to introduce variables that no one had properly documented. He looked mildly annoyed, which was not the standard emotional state approved for interrupting a royal wedding. "Sorry," he said, glancing around as if he had walked into the wrong conference room. "Is this the one with the politically arranged interstellar marriage, or did I miss the correct hallway again?" No one answered immediately because the palace AI was still deciding whether this counted as a threat or an administrative error. Elira's ears tilted slightly, not sharply, just enough to indicate that reality had started behaving like a poorly written simulation. The human scratched the back of his head. "I was told I'm late to my own wedding," he added, "which is fair. I did get briefly swallowed by a negotiation wormhole, and those things are very insistent about paperwork." A soft mechanical whine echoed through the hall as the security system finally reached a consensus. Confusion first, containment later. Drones drifted forward with cautious professionalism, the way one might approach a particularly unpredictable appliance. The Orion diplomat turned slowly toward Elira, as if silently asking whether this was part of Valan culture. Elira considered lying. Her ears betrayed her hesitation. The human took a step forward, then stopped, noticing the floating ceremonial interface still projecting the groom's profile. "Oh," he said, "that's me. I look aggressively pre-approved." "That is the approved diplomatic standard appearance profile," the palace AI announced, slightly too quickly. "I can tell," the human replied. "It looks like someone tried to render a person using only spreadsheets." A few guests emitted sounds that were either outrage or suppressed laughter, depending on how strictly they were monitoring their dignity protocols. The security drones finally moved in. The human sighed, as if this part of the conversation always happened at exactly this time in every universe. "Look," he said, stepping casually to the side as a drone attempted to escort him. "I know I'm not supposed to be here under most interpretations of reality, but I do have documentation." He reached into his jacket. Every weapon system in the room quietly prepared to become very serious. Instead, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. Paper was not illegal in the Veyland Dominion. It was just considered a historical reenactment material. He unfolded it carefully. The palace AI zoomed in, scanned it, and immediately paused. "Impossible," it said. "That's what I said when I signed it," the human replied. The Orion diplomat narrowed his eyes. "What is it?" The AI hesitated in a way that suggested it was considering retirement. "It is a marital authorization contract," it finally said, "registered through a temporal administrative node that does not currently exist in our timeline." Silence settled across the hall. Even the ceremonial lights dimmed slightly, as though embarrassed to be witnessing paperwork with consequences. Elira stepped forward for the first time. Her long ears shifted, catching the subtle distortion in the room's data field. Something about the document was not just illegal. It was confused, as if it had been signed in a version of reality that hadn't fully committed to existing yet. "This is not valid," the Orion diplomat said sharply. The human nodded. "Yeah, I assumed you'd say that. The clerk who notarized it was eating my emergency rations at the time, so I wouldn't call it a perfect process." "That is not a recognized legal standard," the diplomat replied. "Tell that to the clerk," the human said. He had stamps, multiple stamps. He was very confident. One of the drones made a small, uncertain noise, like it was reconsidering its entire purpose in life. Elira looked at the human directly now, not as an interruption, not as an error, as something else. "You are claiming," she said slowly, "that you are the designated groom of this ceremony." The human shrugged. "I'm claiming I have paperwork that says I am," he replied. "I'm not emotionally invested in the title. I mostly came because the wormhole threatened to reroute me into a tax audit dimension if I ignored it again." For the first time since the ceremony began, Elira's ears twitched in a way that was not strictly controlled. It was almost laughter. Almost. The silence after Elira's almost laughter did not behave like ordinary silence. It expanded as if it had been granted funding by a bureaucratic council and intended to use every credit of it. The palace AI recalculated the atmosphere twice, then a third time. Then it politely asked itself whether it should be feeling anxious, and decided not to answer that question without legal representation. The human still stood near the center of the hall, holding the folded contract like it was a mildly inconvenient receipt. One of the security drones hovered too close to him and then drifted away again, as if it had suddenly remembered it left a stove on in another galaxy. The Orion diplomat recovered first. "This is an obvious fabrication," he said, voice sharpening into protocol mode. "A forged temporal document cannot override sovereign matrimonial designation." The human nodded thoughtfully, as if this was a reasonable point someone might make about grocery shopping. "Sure," he said, "but it's not really forged. It's more like pre-authenticated by a version of the universe that hasn't learned better yet." "That is not a legal category," the diplomat replied immediately. "It is where I do most of my paperwork," the human said. Elira's ears shifted again, subtle, controlled. Except control, at this point, was starting to look like a habit rather than a guarantee. The palace AI projected a rotating analysis of the document into the air, then quickly minimized it, as if embarrassed by what it had found. "Temporal seal integrity is inconsistent," it announced carefully. "The authorization appears to have been signed in a corridor between standardized time streams." "That's not a corridor," the human said. "That's a hallway that gave up on linear responsibility." The AI paused. "That distinction is not helpful," it said. "It helps me sleep," the human replied. One of the ceremonial priests made a sound that might have been prayer or system rebooting. Hard to tell. Elira stepped slightly forward again. The movement was small, but the hall reacted to it like a change in gravity. "You said," she began, "that a clerk signed this while consuming your emergency rations." "Yeah," the human said. "He said it improves stamp accuracy." I didn't argue. He had 6 official seals and the confidence of someone who has never read a regulation he didn't personally edit. The Orion diplomat exhaled sharply. "This is absurd," he said. "We are discussing the future of 3-star systems, and you are referencing bureaucratic snacking habits." The human tilted his head. "To be fair," he said, "your entire interstellar alliance is based on ceremonial marriage contracts and predictive compatibility algorithms. That's just bureaucracy with better lighting." A few guests made involuntary noises. Some were scandalized. Some were quietly impressed. One remote projection from the Lyrian cluster briefly flickered into what might have been applause before being muted by its own moderation filters. The drones shifted again, unsure whether they were supposed to be offended or reclassified as decorative lighting. Elira studied the human more closely now. He did not behave like someone trying to win. That was unusual. Most beings in this hall were trying to win something. Status, alliance leverage, historical validation, or at least a favorable footnote in diplomatic archives. He behaved like someone who had already lost an argument with reality and was now negotiating terms with it out of boredom. That was unfamiliar. Her ears twitched again, catching something in the ambient data flow. The contract was still emitting a faint temporal echo signature, like a memory that hadn't decided whether it wanted to exist yet. "You are claiming," she said carefully, "that you are my designated spouse across multiple timeline strata." The human looked mildly offended. "Designated is a strong word," he said. "I prefer accidentally ratified under duress. It feels more honest." The Orion diplomat turned toward Elira sharply. "Princess Elira, this entity is clearly attempting to destabilize the ceremony. I recommend immediate containment and nullification of the document." "Nullification," the AI repeated softly, as if testing whether the word had emotional consequences. The human raised a hand slightly. "Quick question," he said. "If you nullify it, does that erase the version of me that already annoyed your legal system or just the paperwork? Because I'm kind of attached to my continued existence, but I can compromise on the paperwork." No one answered immediately. The reason was simple. No one had ever been asked that in that order before. Elira finally turned fully toward him. Up close, the human did not carry the polished stillness of the Orion diplomat or the ritual precision of Valen nobility. He carried something looser, like probability refusing to sit in a straight line. "You arrived in a maintenance pod," she said. "Correct," he replied. "You disrupted a royal union between two interstellar powers." "Technically," he said, "the wormhole did most of the disruption. I just got thrown in the direction of consequence." "You claim a contract exists that predates this ceremony," she continued. "I wouldn't say it predates it," the human said. "More like it occasionally remembers it already happened somewhere else." Elira's ears tilted slightly inward, not defensive. More like she was trying to listen to a frequency nobody else had tuned into. The palace AI suddenly interjected. "Temporal analysis update," it said. "Probability suggests the contract is not fixed in origin. It is recursively generated based on observed attempts to invalidate it." The Orion diplomat blinked. "That is impossible." The AI paused. "I am aware," it replied. The human smiled faintly. "Oh, good," he said, "so it's working." That sentence caused a ripple through the hall that did not belong to any known communication protocol. Even the lights adjusted themselves slightly off script, as if they were curious. A security drone attempted to approach again, then stopped midair and rotated slowly, as if reconsidering its career path. Elira looked at the contract again. "You are saying," she said slowly, "that the more we reject it, the more it asserts itself." "Yeah," the human said. "It's kind of stubborn, like a cosmic administrative error that refuses to be corrected out of principle." "That is not how law functions," the Orion diplomat snapped. The human shrugged. "Your law functions on 7 layers of mutual agreement and ceremonial symbolism," he said. "I once saw a treaty that required 3 planets to synchronize their sunsets before it became valid." "Don't talk to me about how law functions." A few guests laughed. They tried to stop themselves immediately afterward, as if laughter itself might be flagged as diplomatic misconduct. Elira did not laugh, but her ears did something dangerously close again. She raised a hand, and the hall quieted, not because she commanded it, but because something about her attention made noise feel suddenly unnecessary. "If this contract is valid," she said, "then it supersedes the arranged union." The Orion diplomat looked alarmed. "That would fracture the accord," he said quickly. "Entire systems depend on this alliance structure." The human scratched his cheek. "No pressure," he muttered. "I always wanted to ruin geopolitics before lunch." Elira turned slightly toward him. "You are not concerned," she said. The human considered this. "I am concerned," he said. "But I'm also mildly hungry, and those two emotions usually cancel each other out." The palace AI quietly logged that statement under unknown behavioral stabilizer. Elira stepped closer again. Now the hall itself seemed to lean in. "You have disrupted fate," she said. The human blinked. "That's a bit dramatic," he said. "I prefer misplaced paperwork with consequences." Elira's ears lifted slightly higher. "And what," she asked, "do you intend to do now that you are here?" The human looked around the hall again, at the drones, the diplomats, the hovering contracts, the collapsing certainty of three civilizations trying very hard not to panic. Then he shrugged. "I was hoping someone would offer me directions," he said, "or at least a snack before the universe files another complaint against me." For the first time since the ceremony began, Elira exhaled something that was not part of protocol. It almost sounded like the beginning of a decision. The hall did not collapse into chaos. It negotiated with it. That was the only way anyone later described what happened when Elira finally stepped fully into the space between protocol and possibility. The ceremonial systems tried to maintain equilibrium. The drones tried to enforce structure. The diplomats tried to enforce meaning. The contract tried to enforce existence. And all of them discovered, at the same time, that none of those things were absolute anymore. The human stood slightly off-center now, as if he had instinctively learned that being the center of reality's attention was expensive in ways that were not listed in any known currency system. Elira approached him. Her long ears, those delicate veil and structures that translated emotion into spatial data, no longer stayed rigid. They moved freely now, catching fragments of probability shifts and emotional interference patterns that the palace AI was still pretending not to understand. "You are not from any sanctioned registry," she said. The human nodded. "Correct," he replied. "Sanctioned registries tend to frown upon me. I've been blacklisted by at least 3 forms of bureaucracy that don't technically exist yet." The Orion diplomat stepped forward sharply. "This ceremony is binding under Trihelion Accord law," he insisted. "A retroactive anomaly cannot invalidate sovereign alignment." The palace AI cleared its metaphorical throat. "Correction," it said. "The anomaly is no longer retroactive. It is now concurrent." A pause spread through the hall. Even the lighting systems hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue illuminating this version of reality. The human sighed. "I was afraid you were going to say that," he muttered. "Concurrent anomalies are always more paperwork." Elira turned toward the Orion diplomat. "You said this union was necessary for stability," she said. "Yes," he replied quickly. "Without it, trade corridors collapse, defense treaties weaken, and interstellar trust matrices degrade." "And yet," she said, "we have a contract that claims a different arrangement already exists." The diplomat hesitated. "That document is not legitimate," he said again, but this time the sentence sounded less like law and more like hope. The human raised a hand slightly. "Can I offer a compromise?" he asked. Nobody liked that sentence. Compromises were how things became complicated in ways that required committees, but Elira looked at him. "You may speak," she said. The human nodded. "Okay," he said. "So, I think the contract isn't really about marriage. It's about anchoring 2 incompatible timelines into one shared reference point. Basically, I accidentally signed a document that prevents reality from choosing between versions of the future." The palace AI paused. "That is partially consistent with observed data," it admitted reluctantly. The Orion diplomat frowned. "That is nonsense," he said. "It is administrative nonsense," the human corrected. "That's the most powerful kind." Elira's ears tilted again, but now they were steady, focused, like she was no longer listening to noise but to structure beneath it. "And what does that mean for us?" she asked. The human looked at her for a moment longer than before, not assessing her title, not calculating political impact, just observing. "It means," he said carefully, "that your wedding didn't fail, it forked." A soft ripple passed through the hall. "Forked," one of the priests repeated, horrified. "Like a timeline split," the human explained. "Except instead of 2 clean paths, it created a shared overlap zone where decisions can be renegotiated instead of enforced." The Orion diplomat looked pale. "That is extremely illegal in at least 12 jurisdictions." 13, the AI corrected automatically. The human shrugged. "Yeah, but it's stable," he said. "Mostly. It just smells faintly like unresolved bureaucracy." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Elira stepped forward until she stood directly in front of him. Up close, the human looked less like an intruder and more like a variable that had escaped containment. Not dangerous in itself, but dangerous in what it made other things become. "You came here by accident," she said. "Mostly," he replied. "You disrupted an alliance." I would say I refiled it under pending emotional clarification, he said. A sound escaped Elira then, not controlled, not ceremonial, a laugh. It startled the entire hall more than any drone malfunction had. The human blinked. Oh, good, he said. I was worried I'd have to do all the humor alone. The Orion diplomat looked between them. This is unacceptable, he said weakly. We cannot base interstellar governance on improvisation. The human nodded sympathetically. I agree, he said. That would be terrifying. Elira raised a hand slightly, and the hall quieted again, not through authority but through alignment. The systems were no longer obeying her. They were adjusting around her. I will not proceed with the arranged union, she said clearly. A shockwave of administrative panic rippled through every diplomatic channel in range. The Orion diplomat immediately opened a dozen emergency protocols. None of them finished loading. The human exhaled slowly. That, he said, is going to cause at least 3 crisis simulations to spontaneously become real. Elira continued, but I will also not invalidate the anomaly contract, she said. The palace AI blinked. That creates a dual-state governance paradox, it warned. Good, the human said. Paradoxes are less boring. Elira turned toward the diplomat. The accord will not collapse, she said. It will adapt. That is not how alliances work, he insisted. It is how living systems work, she replied. Her ears shifted gently, not reacting to emotion now, but to understanding. For the first time in her life, she was not listening for approval. She was listening for consequence. The human stepped slightly back. I should probably mention, he said casually, that the wormhole I came through is still open. Everyone froze. Still open? The AI repeated. Yeah, he said. It's been waiting for me to finish my paperwork. It gets impatient. The Orion diplomat looked faintly ill. Close it immediately, he demanded. The human shook his head. I can't, he said. It's part of the contract logic now. If I close it, the timeline snaps back into the original arrangement and you all go back to pretending this didn't happen. Silence. Elira spoke quietly. And you? The human shrugged. I'd probably get reassigned to a tax audit dimension, he said. They're still mad at me for escaping last quarter. Elira considered that. Then she did something no one in the hall had expected. She stepped forward, reached out, and took the folded contract from his hand. The hall reacted instantly. Systems flared. Drones reoriented. Diplomatic AI threads screamed in 3 languages at once. Elira ignored all of it. She unfolded the document fully and pressed her palm against its center. Her ears lifted slightly as she interfaced directly with the temporal signature. You said this anchors timelines, she said. Yes, the human replied cautiously. Then it does not belong to you alone, she said. A pause, the AI spoke carefully. Warning, shared authorization may produce unpredictable sovereign outcomes. The human nodded. Yeah, he said, that's kind of the theme of my life. Elira looked at him. Then very deliberately she added her own signature, not as a bride, not as a political unit, as a decision. The hall went completely silent. Then reality hiccuped, not violently, not destructively, like it had just been asked to consider a new suggestion. The wormhole outside the palace stabilized, glowing faintly like a door that had decided to stop arguing. The Orion diplomat stared. You have just rewritten interstellar marriage law, he said. Elira tilted her head. I have just refused to let it be the only language available, she replied. The human let out a slow breath. Well, he said, that's either going to fix everything or make everything my problem in a more organized way. Elira looked at him. I believe, she said, you already specialize in that. A pause. Then unexpectedly the human smiled. Fair, he said. The contract dissolved into light, not erased but distributed, across systems, across decision points, across possibilities that no longer needed permission to exist. The alliances did not break. They softened, reconfigured, became something that required participation instead of obedience. The Orion diplomat, still visibly unsettled, adjusted his collar. This will be recorded as the most unstable diplomatic event in Trihelion history, he said. The human nodded. Neat, he said. Do I get a plaque? Elira turned slightly toward him. You are no longer an intrusion, she said. The human blinked. What am I then? He asked. Elira's ears shifted once, gently. A variable that stayed, she said. The wormhole behind him hummed patiently.